At my sister's engagement party, my mother lifted the microphone, smiled at 200 guests, and said, "My daughter isn't married, but she's useful. She always knows how to sign a check at the right time." The room laughed. I was standing at the last table, the stem of a champagne glass cold against my fingers. The bubbles kept rising, steady and indifferent. I remember watching my mother's hand rest lightly on my sister's shoulder, how natural it looked. Applause followed. Someone clinked a fork against crystal. My name wasn't spoken, but it hung there anyway, like a receipt no one wanted to read out loud. I didn't move. I didn't correct her. I just stood there and felt something settle into place inside my chest. Not anger. Not even humiliation. Just clarity. That was the moment I understood I had never been seen as a daughter. Only as funding. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The call came at 11:47 p.m. I remember the time because I had just closed my laptop. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher. My name lit up on the screen the way it always does when my mother calls, soft, almost innocent. Her voice when I answered was gentler than usual, careful, measured. She said Chloe needed a proper beginning, a wedding that reflected who she was. She said I was the most successful one in the family. She said it the way people say grace before a meal. "You've always handled things so well," she added. I stood by the kitchen counter while she spoke. The marble felt cool under my palm. I didn't sit down. I didn't ask questions. I could hear my father in the background, low and indistinct, as if this had been rehearsed. My mother said the venue required a deposit immediately, $22,500 to secure the date. There wasn't time to negotiate. There wasn't time for paperwork. I opened my banking app while she was still talking. The screen glowed against the dark window behind me. I entered the amount without requesting a contract, without asking whose name would be on the agreement. I told myself it was easier this way. Cleaner. Families don't send invoices. The transfer confirmation arrived with a soft chime. My mother exhaled in relief. Not gratitude. Relief. The next morning, my father forwarded me a spreadsheet. The subject line read, "Advance from Maddie." Columns of numbers, floral installations, catering tiers, lighting concepts. A line item labeled contingency, funded. I stared at the wording longer than I should have. Advance. As if I were a lender. As if this were temporary. Emails began to arrive by noon. Vendors addressed me as Harper Family Financial Coordinator. One florist wrote, "We'll route all invoices through you as discussed." I searched my memory for the discussion. I found none. I responded anyway. Polite. Efficient. I clarified delivery times, deposit schedules, cancellation policies. I signed off with my full name. Madeline Harper. Not coordinator. Not assistant. Chloe never called. She posted a photo that evening instead. A filtered shot of her hand against Evan's jacket captioned, "It's happening." Grateful for family magic. Comments filled the screen. Hearts. Champagne glasses. No mention of transfers. No mention of deposits. I watched the notifications stack up in silence. There is a particular feeling when you realize you are underwriting someone else's dream without being written into the story. It is not sharp. It does not bleed. It settles. Like sediment at the bottom of a glass. Over the next week, the amounts grew. Smaller transfers at first. $3,800 for custom linens. $6,200 for a live string quartet. I paid them because it felt easier than explaining why I wouldn't. Then I saw the charge. $18,000. Decor enhancement package. Charged to the secondary card under my account. I didn't remember approving it. I logged into the credit portal and scrolled through the details. The billing address was my parents' house. The signature authorization was digital. The timestamp was mid-afternoon when I had been in a client meeting. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. His tone was casual, almost amused. He said they had upgraded the decor to something more fitting. He said it was a small adjustment. He said they assumed I wouldn't mind. Assumed. I looked around my apartment while he spoke, at the framed degrees on the wall, at the quiet furniture I had chosen piece by piece. Everything in that room had been paid for deliberately, signed for consciously. This was different. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it Records. I dragged every confirmation email into it, every receipt, every authorization notice. I told myself it was for organization. But somewhere beneath that calm, beneath the steady rhythm of transactions and polite replies, something else was forming. Not resentment. Not yet. Just a slow, clear understanding. I wasn't helping. I was being managed. I wasn't helping. I was being managed. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in small administrative ways. A week after the decor charge, my mother forwarded me a PDF titled Event Liability Insurance Contract. No greeting, no explanation, just a single line beneath it. You understand legal terms better than we do. I opened it at my desk during lunch. 37 pages, indemnity clauses, alcohol liability riders, weather contingencies. My name had already been listed as the financial guarantor. I revised 2 sections flagged an exposure risk and sent it back with tracked changes. No one acknowledged the edits. The signed version came through later that evening. Clean, final, efficient. Somewhere in the internal email chain, one that I had not been meant to see, a planner accidentally included me in a reply all. I read it slowly twice just to be sure. Primary sponsor, do not include in program acknowledgments per family request. Primary sponsor, do not include. The words sat on the screen with a kind of sterile politeness. No insult, no apology, just instruction. I didn't respond. I simply removed myself from the thread. A few days later, I learned the official wedding date from Chloe's TikTok. A glossy countdown video. Slow-motion shots of the venue grounds. A caption that read, 90 days until forever. 90 days. No one had told me. I replayed the video once, then closed the app. My reflection hovered faintly over the darkened screen. The dress fitting happened on a Saturday. I knew because my mother sent a photo afterward, Chloe standing on a pedestal, lace pooling around her feet. My mother's caption read, "Perfect day with my girls." There were 3 women in the frame. I was not one of them. When I asked gently why I hadn't been invited, my mother said it wouldn't have felt right. She said bridal fittings are intimate. She said I wouldn't enjoy that atmosphere. Later, when I pressed just slightly harder, she sighed. "You don't need the spotlight, Maddie. You need responsibility." She said it like it was a compliment. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. The apartment felt unusually quiet. The refrigerator cycling on and off. A car passing outside. Responsibility. It sounded heavier than it should have. That night, I renamed the folder on my desktop. Records became evidence. The shift was subtle but deliberate. I began saving everything: bank confirmations, vendor emails, screenshots of internal notes. I created subfolders, deposits, amendments, communications. It felt clinical, almost professional. A week later, I logged into the family trust portal. The trust had been established years ago, my parents' idea of security. I had contributed to it consistently, quietly. 80% of the total value came from my accounts. I had never thought of that as leverage. It was simply what I did. The balance was lower than it should have been. Not drastically. Not enough to trigger automatic alerts. But enough. I pulled the transaction history and traced the withdrawals. Several had been approved within the same week as the decor upgrade: event services, venue enhancement, strategic allocation. I did not remember authorizing those amounts. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was reviewing a client forecast. Sylvia Bennett. She rarely called without reason. Her voice was composed neutral. She asked how I was. Then she paused just slightly before continuing. "I need to clarify something," she said. "Did you personally approve the recent distributions from the Harper Trust?" There was no accusation in her tone, only precision. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the skyline outside my office window. Glass towers reflecting late afternoon light. Order, structure, predictability. "No," I said. There was a brief silence on the line, paper shifting on her end. "That's what I thought," she replied. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The implications settled between us without drama. When we ended the call, I remained seated for several minutes. My hands were still on the desk, my breathing steady. This wasn't miscommunication anymore. It wasn't oversight. It wasn't a social slight. It was systematic. I thought about the phrase in the email: primary sponsor, do not include. I thought about the dress fitting, the TikTok countdown, the liability contract already bearing my name. Invisibility is rarely accidental. It is arranged, structured, approved. And I was beginning to understand just how carefully mine had been designed. Invisibility is rarely accidental. It is arranged, structured, approved. The official invitation arrived 2 weeks late. I knew it was late because I had already paid the final catering installment by the time the envelope showed up in my mailbox. Thick cream cardstock, embossed lettering, my address written in a looping script I didn't recognize. I stood in my kitchen and slid it open carefully. "Mr. and Mrs. Douglas Harper request the honor." My eyes moved down the page until I found my name. Madeline H. Not Madeline. Not even Harper spelled out in full. Just an initial, as if space had run short. I ran my thumb lightly over the ink, half expecting it to smudge. It didn't. Inside, there was no RSVP card addressed to me. No space to indicate a +1. Just the assumption of attendance printed cleanly into the design. A week later, the seating chart draft was uploaded to the wedding portal for internal review. I opened the PDF late at night. Table 21. I scanned the layout twice to be certain. The diagram placed it near the service corridor adjacent to the staff exit and restrooms. The smallest table in the room. 8 seats, 3 vendors' assistants, a distant neighbor from my parents' old street, and me. Table 21 was not within view of the head table. It was not near the dance floor. It was positioned where people pass through, not where they remain. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. The wedding website went live shortly after. I opened it from my phone while sitting in my car outside the office. The special thanks section listed family members, childhood friends, a florist who had gone above and beyond. Even Evan's college roommate received a paragraph of appreciation. My name did not appear. Not once. Later that week, a promotional drone video was posted on social media. Sweeping shots of Harbor Crest Estate at sunset. The narrator's voice, warm polished, said, "With gratitude to both families who made this union possible." The camera drifted over the manicured lawn, the white tent, the chandeliers that I had paid for. Both families. I replayed that line twice. When I finally asked my mother about it, I kept my tone neutral. I mentioned the seating chart, the website omission, the spelling. There was a pause on the other end of the call, followed by a faint sigh. "Maddie," she said, "a wedding isn't a financial report." Her voice held a kind of weary patience, as if I had misunderstood the nature of celebration itself. I didn't respond immediately. "I'm not asking for a spreadsheet," I said quietly. She shifted the conversation to flower arrangements. I let her. Chloe was less restrained. When I brought up the website, she laughed softly, not cruelly, just dismissively. "You're being too sensitive," she said. "It's not about credits. It's about love." The word lingered in the air between us. Love. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the table. A few days later, I attended a small dinner at my parents' house. Extended family, old acquaintances. I moved through the kitchen carrying plates the way I always had. At one point, I stepped into the hallway to retrieve my coat. I wasn't meant to hear the conversation drifting from the living room. My father's voice was low, confident. "She's fine," he told one of his friends. "She doesn't have a family of her own to worry about." There was a brief chuckle. Agreement murmured in response. "She's always been independent." Independent? The word sounded different in that context. Not admirable. Convenient. I stood there in the dim hallway light, my hand resting on the back of a chair. The house smelled like roasted chicken and lemon polish. Familiar. Domestic. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to walk back into that room and correct him. To say that independence is not the same as availability. That not having a spouse does not mean lacking commitments. I didn't. I put on my coat. I said goodbye. I drove home alone. That night, I reopened the evidence folder. I added the seating chart PDF, screenshots of the website, the drone video link. I labeled them carefully. Not because I needed proof of hurt, but because I was beginning to understand something much colder. I was not being overlooked. I was being placed. I was not being overlooked. I was being placed. The final confirmation came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had logged into the trust portal again, not because I expected anything new, but because habit had begun to replace denial. That was when I saw the outgoing request pending authorization $40,000. The approval note attached to it was brief. Per prior discussion. Urgent. The sender was my father. There was no digital signature from me, no consent record. Just an assumption folded into a sentence. I forwarded the screenshot to Sylvia. She called within the hour. Her tone was even, as it always was. No judgment, no sympathy, just clarity. "You are the primary contributor and controlling beneficiary," she said. "No additional distribution should be processed without your direct authorization." There was a pause. "If you believe funds are being misrepresented," she added carefully, "you have the right to freeze the trust immediately." The word freeze settled differently than the others had. It carried weight. Finality. I didn't answer right away. I watched the city below my office window, traffic moving in steady lines, people crossing streets without looking up. "Send me the paperwork," I said. That evening, I drove past the townhouse. It sat 3 blocks from the marina. Brick exterior. Narrow balcony. I had purchased it 2 years earlier as an investment property. It was fully in my name. Quiet. Unremarkable. Mine. A week earlier, Chloe had posted a story about new beginnings. The background looked suspiciously like that same street. I had asked my mother about it casually. She smiled too quickly. "It's a surprise," she said. "A gift. Something meaningful." When I confronted my father more directly, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "It's an emotional investment," he told me. "You don't even use the place." Emotional investment. As if ownership were negotiable when sentiment entered the room. I looked at him for a long time before answering. "It's not yours to promise." He didn't apologize. He adjusted his glasses and changed the subject. 10 days before the wedding, I signed the authorization to freeze the trust. The document was 3 pages long, precise, formal, clinical. Sylvia confirmed receipt at 9:12 a.m. By noon, the first declined transaction notification arrived, the band's final installment. By 2 o'clock, the catering balance. By 4, the venue's supplemental lighting invoice. My phone began vibrating before the workday ended. First my mother, then Chloe, then my father. I let them go to voicemail. The family group chat exploded by early evening. "How could you do this? Do you understand what you've just done? This is selfish, Maddie." Selfish. The word appeared repeatedly. Different phrasing, same accusation. I sat at my dining table while the notifications stacked up. The room was dim except for the light over the sink. My laptop remained closed. I did not defend myself. I did not explain the unauthorized withdrawals. I did not reference the townhouse. I did not mention the $40,000 request. I opened the evidence folder instead. Screenshot. Save. Another message. Screenshot. Save. The accusations grew sharper as the hours passed. My mother wrote that I was humiliating the family. Chloe said Evan's parents would never forget this. My father typed a long paragraph about loyalty and sacrifice. I read each one carefully. Then I archived them. There is a moment when something shifts inside you, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet permanence. The noise outside continues, but internally a decision has already been made. I was not punishing them. I was stopping the transaction. And for the first time since that champagne glass felt cold in my hand, I felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not guilt. Control. Control. It felt steady at first. Contained. Like a door I had quietly closed. The next morning, my mother called before 8 a.m. I knew something had shifted by the way her voice sounded. No polish, no careful phrasing, just breath coming too quickly between words. They're demanding payment, she said. The caterer won't release the final schedule. The venue is threatening to cancel access to the property unless the balance clears today. I could hear papers rustling, a drawer slamming, panic moving through the room on her end. They can't do that, she added, as if I had orchestrated something beyond basic contract law. I remained seated at my kitchen table while she spoke. Sunlight was just beginning to reach the edge of the floor. I wrapped my hand around a mug that had already gone cold. They can, I said quietly. The guarantor withdrew. There was silence. Then, accusation. You're humiliating us. I did not argue. I ended the call gently. Evan showed up at my office 2 days later. He didn't smile the way he usually did. No charm. No rehearsed ease. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, tie loosened slightly as if he had walked in a hurry. We sat across from each other in the small conference room overlooking the harbor. This doesn't have to get ugly, he said. His voice was measured but strained. For the first time, I saw calculation instead of confidence. You know Chloe, he continued. She's fragile right now. I looked at him without responding. You're putting us in a terrible position, he said. My parents think this is instability. Instability. The word lingered in the air between us. I didn't promise them a townhouse, I replied. You should speak to the person who did. His jaw tightened slightly. She told me it was settled, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was realization. Chloe called that night. She didn't begin with anger. She began with tears. You're ruining my life, she said. Her voice cracked in a way I had rarely heard before. I imagined her sitting on her bed dress bags hanging nearby, invitations already mailed. Everything was finally perfect. I let the silence stretch. You could have talked to me, she added. I thought about the seating chart, the website, the drone footage. I tried, I said. She cried harder. I ended the call before either of us said something irreversible. My father arrived at my apartment the following evening. He didn't sit down. You owe this family loyalty, he said, standing in my living room as if it were neutral territory. I noticed he avoided looking at the framed deed on the wall behind me, the townhouse documents I had hung as a reminder of my own independence. I owe contracts, I replied. I don't owe exploitation. He stared at me as though I had spoken a foreign language. This is how families work, he insisted. No, I said calmly. This is how leverage works. He left without another word. By the end of the week, Sylvia had issued formal notice. A clean, precise document stating that all fiduciary responsibility for the event now rested solely with Douglas and Patricia Harper. My name was removed as guarantor. The legal phrasing was careful, irrefutable. 2 vendors threatened litigation within 48 hours. The band refused to hold the date without certified funds. The venue sent a written warning about breach of agreement. The florist requested immediate settlement before proceeding with installation. The noise grew louder outside my walls. Inside, it remained quiet. Then came the voicemail. My mother's voice, low and bitter. "She's nothing but a walking ATM," she said to someone in the background, unaware the call had connected. There was a faint laugh, hers or someone else's. "She thinks she's above us now." The message ended abruptly. I replayed it once. Not for pain, not for proof, for confirmation. I saved the audio file into the evidence folder. There are moments when collapse is visible: raised voices, canceled contracts, public embarrassment. And then, there are moments when collapse is internal. That voicemail was the latter. Something inside me settled completely after that. Not anger, not revenge, just the absence of obligation. Just the absence of obligation. The wedding went on anyway. Scaled back. Rearranged. Quietly financed, I assumed, through emergency measures and borrowed pride. I received no formal confirmation, no revised invitation. But the date had already been etched into my mind from that tick-tock countdown. I arrived at Harbor Crest Estate just before sunset. The sky was pale gold, the kind that makes everything appear softer than it is. I wore a simple black dress, no sequins, no dramatic silhouette, just clean lines and sleeves that reached my wrists. I parked at the far end of the gravel drive and walked the remaining distance alone, heels sinking slightly into the ground. Inside, chandeliers glowed above white draped tables. The decor had been adjusted, fewer floral arches, more restrained centerpieces, but the illusion of grandeur remained intact. I took my place at table 21, near the service corridor. From there, I could see the back of my sister's chair at the head table, but not her face. The band played softly. Waitstaff moved in deliberate lines around me, trays balanced on steady hands. My mother took the microphone halfway through dinner. Her dress shimmered under the lights. She held the glass stem carefully, as if she were delivering something delicate rather than declarative. She began with gratitude. For love, for family, for those who sacrifice quietly so others may shine. The room hummed with polite attention. Then she looked at me. Not subtly, not accidentally. "There are people," she said, her voice smooth, "who aren't meant for marriage. They're meant to support it." A pause. "Some are born to build families." She continued, smiling faintly. "Others are born to make sure those families succeed." Laughter spread across the room. Not cruel, just comfortable. I felt the sound travel across the air and settle at my table. A fork clinked against porcelain nearby. Someone shifted in their chair. For a moment, I remained still. The band had begun a soft transition into the next song. A low instrumental swell, barely noticeable. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I simply walked toward the stage while the music was still playing. A few heads turned. Then more. The keyboardist faltered when he saw me approach. The melody dissolved into an uncertain chord before fading out entirely. I reached the microphone before anyone thought to stop me. Up close, I could see my mother's expression change. Not fear, calculation. I held the microphone with both hands. "I'll keep this brief," I said. My voice carried clearly through the speakers. Steady, unshaken. "I've contributed a total of $118,400 to this evening." There was movement in the crowd, subtle shifts, glances exchanged. "That includes venue deposits, catering installments, lighting contracts, and insurance coverage." The words felt precise in my mouth. Not emotional. Documented. "I want to clarify something," I continued. The trust that financed these payments has been legally frozen. A ripple of silence spread outward. I am no longer the guarantor for any remaining balances associated with this event. The room did not erupt. It did not gasp dramatically. It simply stilled. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of waves beyond the windows. Chloe's hands were gripping the edge of the table. Evan stared at me as if recalculating something he hadn't anticipated. My mother's face had gone pale beneath the makeup. "I wish you both well," I said finally, "but I will not fund a story I'm not allowed to exist in." I lowered the microphone gently back onto its stand. For several seconds, no one moved. Then a chair scraped against the floor. Dr. Leonard Price, who had been seated near the front as an honored guest, stood slowly. He did not clap. He did not speak. He simply looked at me with an expression that was no longer neutral. It wasn't sympathy. It was recognition. And in that silence, thicker than any applause, I understood something clearly. I was no longer seated at table 21. I was no longer seated at table 21. I left before anyone could decide how to respond. The gravel shifted under my heels as I walked back to my car. Behind me, the music tried to resume, hesitant, uneven. Voices rose not loudly but urgently. I didn't look back. The reception did not last the night. I learned that later. The venue requested certified payment within the hour. When none arrived, access to the bar was suspended. The event manager approached my father discreetly at first, then less discreetly. Guests began to notice the absence of refilled glasses. The band stopped mid-set when confirmation of their balance never came through. By 10:30, the lights were raised to full brightness. A wedding that had been curated for months unraveled in under 90 minutes. Evan left before the cake was cut. Someone sent me a photograph taken from across the lawn, him standing near the valet stand, jacket over his shoulder, phone pressed to his ear. His posture was no longer composed. It was angled defensive. Chloe posted a story before midnight. Black background, white text. "Some people can't stand seeing others happy." No names, no context, just implication. I watched it once. Then I closed the app. The next morning, Sylvia forwarded me a copy of the formal reimbursement demand. A structured document outlining unauthorized distributions, misrepresented approvals, and liability transfer. It was precise, clinical, unemotional. She had CC'd both of my parents. Within hours, several vendors began redirecting invoices directly to them. Some threatened litigation if balances weren't resolved within 7 business days. I didn't intervene. That afternoon, a video arrived in my inbox. No subject line, just a file attachment from an unfamiliar number. I opened it slowly. The footage was grainy, filmed from behind a floral display. My mother stood near the catering manager, laughing softly. "She'll cover it," she said. "She always does. She's basically a walking ATM." There was amusement in her tone. Not frustration, not stress. Confidence. The video ended with the sound of glass clinking. I watched it twice, not because it hurt more the second time, but because it confirmed what I had already understood. The following day, my phone rang again. Dr. Leonard Price. I let it ring once before answering. His voice was calm, deliberate. "What you did last night," he said, "was the hardest version of strength." I didn't respond immediately. "Most people confuse generosity with obligation," he continued. "You separated the two." There was no praise in his tone, just observation. "I've seen families collapse over less," he added quietly. "So have I said. We spoke briefly after that about nothing directly related to the wedding. Markets, a potential partnership I had mentioned months earlier, practical things. But the call carried something unspoken. Recognition. That evening, my father sent an email. It was long, structured in paragraphs. He wrote about embarrassment, about public perception, about how I had chosen a moment that would follow the family for years. There was no apology, only disappointment. I read it once, then archived it. 3 weeks later, Chloe called. Her voice sounded smaller. "It's over," she said. She didn't elaborate. I had already seen the absence of ring photos, the disappearance of shared captions, the quiet removal of engagement highlights. Evan said he can't build a future with uncertainty, she added. Uncertainty. The word hung there. I thought about the townhouse, the frozen trust, the seating chart. "I hope you're okay," I said. It was the only honest sentence available. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment as the evening light faded across the floor. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, just a quiet stillness. Consequences don't arrive loudly. They settle. And once they do, they rarely leave the room the same way they entered. Consequences don't arrive loudly. They settle. In the weeks that followed, I began moving pieces quietly. The townhouse was the first. I listed it with a broker I trusted. No announcement. No family discussion. The paperwork was straightforward. Market value had risen since I purchased it. Within 18 days, it was under contract. When the sale closed, I stood inside the empty living room one last time. The walls were bare. The echo was soft, but definite. I ran my hand along the window frame not out of sentiment, but to confirm finality. It had never been a gift. It had always been an asset. The proceeds went directly into an account solely under my name. The family trust came next. With Sylvia's guidance, I formally withdrew my contributions and dissolved my position as primary beneficiary. The documents were clean, methodical. No emotion embedded in the language. I read every line before signing. Afterward, I logged into every shared portal, banking, insurance, investment dashboards, and removed secondary access. Passwords were updated, permissions revoked, notifications redirected. Each change felt small, but cumulative. I did not announce these decisions. I did not justify them. I simply implemented them. Communication with my parents tapered naturally. At first, there were messages framed as concern, then as disappointment, then silence. I did not block their numbers. I just stopped answering. Chloe reached out once more. A single text message. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying." I read it twice before responding. "I didn't realize either," I wrote back. There was no follow-up. At my office, I ordered a small plaque for my desk. Nothing dramatic. Brushed metal, clean type, self-funded, self-made. I placed it beside my monitor where only I could see it. Not as a declaration to others, as a reminder to myself. Leonard and I began meeting weekly after that. Our conversations were focused capital allocation, risk assessment, long-term strategy. He treated my opinions as equal weight. No condescension, no assumption. One afternoon, as we reviewed projections for a new venture, he paused and said, "You operate differently now." I considered that. "I stopped financing narratives I'm not part of," I replied. He nodded once. The evidence folder remained on my desktop longer than necessary. Hundreds of files, screenshots, contracts, audio clips, a digital archive of erosion. One evening, after finalizing the last of the financial transitions, I copied the entire folder onto an encrypted external drive. I labeled it with the date. Then I deleted it from my computer. The empty space where it had been felt strange at first. Lighter. I didn't need daily reminders anymore. Documentation had served its purpose. Control, I learned, is not loud. It doesn't demand recognition. It exists quietly in the choices you no longer explain. And for the first time in years, my accounts, financial and emotional, were balanced. Control, I learned, is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It rearranges your life quietly until one day you wake up and recognize the architecture. A month after the wedding collapsed, I wrote a post on LinkedIn. It wasn't dramatic. No names, no accusations. Just a measured reflection on financial boundaries within families, how generosity becomes expectation, how expectation becomes entitlement, and how silence sustains both. I wrote it late at night, sitting at my kitchen table with the city dim outside the window. I revised it twice before publishing. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. By morning, the notifications had multiplied beyond anything I anticipated. Investors shared it. Attorneys commented. Women I had never met sent private messages describing versions of the same story, different numbers, different holidays, the same quiet erosion. The post moved through networks I had never consciously entered. Not because it was sensational, because it was familiar. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership conference in Atlanta. Women in Finance, Women in Venture. The panel topic was framed as Power Boundaries and Self-Authorship. I stood backstage before my session, hands resting lightly at my sides. The room beyond the curtain hummed with conversation. Not judgment, not expectation. When I stepped onto the stage, I didn't tell the story as spectacle. I spoke about contracts, about consent, about the difference between support and subsidy. The applause at the end was steady, grounded. Afterward, I walked back to my hotel alone. That same week, I mailed a small package to my parents' house. Inside was a simple frame, matte black, empty. On the backing in clean lettering, I had printed a single line: "Love is not an invoice." I did not include a note. I never heard whether they displayed it or threw it away. Over time, invitations to neighborhood gatherings stopped arriving at their address. I heard it secondhand from an aunt from an old friend that the wedding fallout had altered how people saw them. Not dramatically, just subtly. Trust erodes quietly in social circles too. I did not feel satisfaction. Isolation is not something I celebrate, but consequences have their own momentum. 6 months after the sale of the townhouse, I bought a small house overlooking the water. Not a mansion, not a statement, white siding, wide windows, a narrow deck that faced the horizon. The deed carried only my name. The first night there, I sat outside with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The air smelled faintly of salt and cedar. The tide moved in steady rhythm below. There was no one to impress, no ledger to balance, no approval pending. Just space. For years, I had mistaken usefulness for worth. I had equated being needed with being valued. They are not the same. Value does not require depletion. As the sun lowered into the water, I realized something that felt almost unfamiliar. I was not calculating anything, not cost, not risk, not emotional return. For the first time, I did not feel like someone's reserve fund, someone's guarantee, someone's contingency plan. I felt singular, and in that quiet, with nothing owed and nothing pending, I understood what freedom actually costs. It isn't money, it's permission.